Good afternoon. I'm Melissa, and the claim that I will be responding to today is that alternative energies can effectively replace fossil fuels. I will refute that and state that alternative energies are ineffective in replacing fossil fuels. The advocate's three secondary claims are the continual source of energy, large-scale job creations, and stable pricing. Going back to the advocate's first secondary claim, which is the continual source of energy, some of his evidence can be seen as biased. He uses a quote from Tom Kiernan and states that wind power is well on its way to become 20% of the U.S.'s energy supplier by 2030. Tom Kiernan is the CEO of a company that is in favor of alternative energy, that being the American Wind Energy Association, sorry. So it can be seen as more of a way to promote the association's beliefs rather than be used as a factual statement. The advocate also uses solar energy and nuclear energy to back up his claim of continual source of energy. The problem with solar energy is that it's too widely dispersed, and the land required to actually collect an economical amount of energy is really hard, as no matter how much you design a solar powered energy plant, it will only be insufficient, and it will only acquire a small amount of energy that will actually be able to be used. And going back to nuclear energy as well, the rocks in nuclear energy will begin to decay over time, and it will be a concentration of radioactivity waste will begin to rise. This can be very dangerous to the environment, as well as when this radioactivity is released into the atmosphere and the ocean, it can be very harmful to humans and the environment. Going to secondary claim number 2, which is large job scale creation. Procom.org states that the government cannot create jobs if it will be essentially closing off one job field in order to open up another job field, which it will be more replacing jobs rather than creating jobs. And although it won't, renewable energy will be in the mix of the energy that consumers will be using, it will only represent a small fraction of the energy that consumers will be using, and it won't necessarily lead us to economic relief. Secondary claim number 3 of stable pricing states that alternative energy has more of a stable price than fossil fuel energy, but this is also not true, because on days where we will not see the sun and the weather fluctuates, those who are dependent on solar energy will have to purchase very large battery packs in order to store the energy that they will be needing on those days where we may not see the sun. Supermarkets will also require a PV system 10 times the size of its own roof. And what PV systems are, they are photovoltaic systems, which are solar power systems used to supply usable solar energy. In order for the U.S. to be able to even consider replacing fossil fuels with alternative energy, they will have to think about the amount of territory that they will have to give up in order to build these solar power systems. It will take about 20% of U.S. territory, and that is the size of California, Arizona, Nevada, and Texas combined. So essentially, it will cost more to clear the land, make these solar power plants, rather than stabilize the price of energy that it will give off to consumers in the long run. In conclusion, alternative energies are ineffective in replacing fossil fuels because they are uneconomic. They will not really be creating jobs, they will be replacing jobs instead. And the pricing of alternative energy will not really be stabilized.
Okay, structurally everything is sound. It's very easy to follow. On the individual points, you've got criticisms of some of the advocates' evidence. Like on the first point, you suggest that the source might be biased because they are, in fact, a company that specializes in wind energy, and they might be hyping themselves up a little bit. I think that's a reasonable press to make, but there's not any counter evidence. In fact, you suggest that solar energy is too dispersed, that the land requirements are high, that it can only be done on a small scale, and I'm waiting for the evidence to support that, and you don't present any evidence. And I assume that that's based on something that you researched, but you didn't give me any source citation on that. That's a little bit problematic. The nuclear waste issue, I think, suggests that there are problems as well. Same sort of thing. I'm aware of what the problem with nuclear waste is, but you kind of treat it as an assumption without offering proof for it, and I think you need to document that kind of thing. On the job creation argument, your argument here is that it ultimately ends up being a trade-off. We trade one set of jobs for another set of jobs. So does that mean that there will be no net gain in jobs? I think that's the inference that you're making, although you don't give me any numbers and a reason to believe that the trade-off would be 1-to-1. There might be, in fact, more jobs in one industry than the other, but I appreciate the concept behind this argument. Again, I think a little bit more proof would be helpful. On the third point concerning stable pricing, you give us the general criticisms of sun and wind energy being weather related. I understood that idea. Once again, I think this is one of those places where there's some evidence that needs to be cited. You have a piece of information that suggests that the example of the supermarket would have to have a roof 10 times its current size in order for the photovoltaic cells to be able to provide sufficient energy for the grocery store. I don't think you made that up. I know you got it from someplace, but I don't get a source citation on that. That's a little bit problematic. Procon.com, which does get cited in one or two places, is what we call an aggregate site. It's generally not original research. They're providing research from some other source, and it's best to go to the primary sources on those. That's you've got the 20% estimate on the end of that third point, and I don't know what that's based on and where that information came from. I do think you do a very nice job speaking to the audience for the most part, talking to us, and you kind of summarize as you go along. So as you're making the transition from one idea to the next, you try to explain why it is your point is valid, and I like the summary that you had at the end also. All right, thank you.